He was a king in a glass castle, a man who moved markets with a single word. That night, Liam Crestwood was about to sign a deal worth $10 billion a deal that would secure his legacy forever. The contract was signed, the champagne was poured. But then a voice no louder than a rustle of silk cut through the noise of his victory. A waitress, a woman he hadn't even noticed, leaned in close and whispered fatal words that shattered his world. She said, "The deal is rigged." And in that instant, the king's castle began to crumble as the billionaire's face turned deathly pale. The air in Aurelia, a restaurant so exclusive it didn't have a sign, was thick with the scent of old money and new absorption. It smelled of truffle oil, vintage Bordeaux, and the silent, ferocious hum of power. At its gravitational center sat Liam Crestwood, a man sculpted from ambition and tailored Italian wool. At 42, he possessed the kind of sharp, predatory handsomeness that made rivals nervous and investors compliant. His empire, Crestwood Capital, was a titan of venture capitalism, and tonight he was closing the largest acquisition of his career. Across the table, Silas Corbin smiled, his teeth a little too white, his charm a little too slick. Silas was the CEO of Viridian Dynamics, the company Liam was about to absorb for the staggering sum of $10 billion. The prize was Viridian's Helios Core technology, a revolutionary form of decentralized energy production that promised to make the global power grid obsolete. It was the future, and Liam was buying it. To the future, Liam, Silas toasted, raising his glass of Chateau Margaux. And to a partnership that will redefine the 21st century. Liam inclined his head, a minimalist gesture that conveyed agreement without betraying enthusiasm. He was a man of control of calculated risks and exhaustive due diligence. His team, led by the sharpest minds from MIT and Stanford, had spent 6 months tearing apart Viridian's data. They'd run every simulation, stress-tested every projection, and vetted every patent. The Helios Core was by all accounts perfect. A flawless diamond. To the future. Liam echoed his voice, a low baritone that commanded attention. The crystal glasses chimed a sound that to him represented the final lock clicking into place. The deal was done. The wire transfers were scheduled for the morning. His chief legal counsel, seated to his right, slid a heavy, leather-bound portfolio across the mahogany table. "Just the final signature, Mr. Crestwood," the lawyer murmured, offering a gold Montblanc pen, like a scepter. Liam took the pen. The weight of it was familiar, comfortable. He uncapped it, the quiet click barely audible over the restaurant's hushed symphony. His eyes scanned the final paragraph, a formality he never skipped. His world was one of details of fine print, where fortunes were won and lost. Everything was in order. He lowered the nib to the signature line, the ink ready to seal his legacy. It was in that suspended moment, a breath held between one epoch of his life and the next, that she appeared. She moved with an efficiency that made her almost invisible, a ghost in a crisp black uniform. Her job was to be unobtrusive, to refill water glasses and clear plates without disturbing the flow of conversation. He had not registered her face, her presence, or anything about her all evening. She was simply part of the room's impeccable service. As she reached to clear away a bread plate beside him, she leaned in her head close to his shoulder. Her proximity was a minor breach of protocol, but he assumed she was about to ask a standard question. Instead, her voice, a quiet, urgent whisper, found its way directly into his ear, bypassing the noise of the celebration. It was a voice that held no deference, only a cold, hard clarity. "Don't sign it," she said. Liam's hand froze an inch above the paper. His focus, once laser-sharp on the contract, fractured. He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers for the first time. She wasn't looking at him with the awe or fear he was accustomed to. Her eyes, a startling, intelligent grey, were fixed on his with an unnerving intensity. They held a warning, a plea, and a deep, simmering anger. He felt a flash of irritation. A prank. A stunt by an evil. He was about to dismiss her with a cold glare, to have her removed and fired. But then she spoke again, her lips barely moving, her voice so low it was a vibration more than a sound. "The deal is rigged," she told him quietly. And as the 5 words registered something in their simple, terrifying certainty, bypassed his defenses. It wasn't the accusation itself. He'd heard baseless claims and corporate espionage tactics 100 times. It was the way she said it. The utter lack of doubt. The quiet desperation that spoke not of malice, but of truth. "The Helios core has a fatal flaw. A ghost in the machine," she added, her gaze unwavering. He buried it deep. Ask him about Protocol 0. And then, just as quickly as she appeared, she straightened up the bread plate in her hand. To everyone else at the table, it looked like a moment of routine service. Silas was still smiling, his lawyers were chatting amongst themselves. No one else had heard. No one else had seen the exchange. But Liam Crestwood, the man who prided himself on seeing every angle, on anticipating every move, felt a sudden chilling drop in the pit of his stomach. A cold dread, alien and unwelcome, crept up his spine. Protocol 0. The phrase was specific, technical. It wasn't the rambling of a crank. It was a key. He looked at Silas Corbin, whose smile hadn't wavered. But now, filtered through the waitress's warning, Liam saw it differently. The charm seemed predatory, the confidence a little too polished. He looked down at the contract, at his name, waiting to be written. The $10 billion deal. His legacy. A flawless diamond. Or was it a perfect, glittering fake? He slowly, deliberately capped the Mont Blanc pen. The click echoed in the sudden silence of his mind. "Gentlemen," Liam said, his voice perfectly level, betraying none of the chaos erupting within him. "There's a minor detail I'd like to re-verify before we conclude." Across the table, Silas Corbin's smile tightened just a fraction of a degree. It was almost imperceptible, but Liam saw it. And in that moment, the billionaire's face, a mask of confident authority, just seconds before, turned pale. The shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate and seismic, though only 2 men were truly aware of it. To the lawyers and executives, Liam Crestwood's sudden pause was a quirk, a final bout of meticulousness from a famously thorough man. But to Silas Corbin, it was a threat. "A minor detail, Liam," Silas asked, his voice a smooth balm, intended to soothe any hesitation. "My team and yours have been over this with a fine-tooth comb for months. I assure you, every I is dotted." Liam met his gaze, his own expression now an unreadable granite wall. The initial shock had been replaced by a cold, controlled fury. Fury at himself for potentially missing something, and a deeper, more dangerous fury at the possibility of being played for the fool. "Nevertheless," Liam said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He slid the portfolio back to his lawyer. "My team will reach out to yours in the morning to clarify a technical query. We'll postpone the final signature until then." It was a power move, a declaration that he was still in control. The Crestwood Capital legal team, though confused, nodded in assent. The Viridian executives exchanged uneasy glances. Silas Corbin's mask of affability held, but his eyes had gone cold and hard like chips of ice. The celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, unspoken uncertainty. Liam stood. "Thank you for the dinner, Silas. I look forward to concluding our business." He offered a handshake that was firm, correct, and utterly devoid of warmth. As he walked away from the table, his security detail falling into step behind him. His mind was a maelstrom. Protocol 0. The phrase echoed a discordant note in the symphony of his success. Who was that woman? How could she possibly know something that his army of analysts had missed? His lead security officer, Ben Carter, a former SAS soldier with a face that looked like it had been carved from a block of wood, opened the door to the armored Maybach. "Everything all right, sir?" Ben asked, his voice a low rumble. He was one of the few people who could sense the subtle shifts in Liam's demeanor. "No," Liam said, sinking into the plush leather. "Everything is not all right." He looked back at the restaurant. He had an urge to storm back in, to find the waitress and demand answers. But that would be a public spectacle, a sign of weakness. He needed to be smarter. "Ben," Liam said, as the car pulled silently into the rain-slicked New York street. "The waitress who served our table tonight, the one with grey eyes, maybe 5'7" brown hair tied back. I need to know who she is. I need to know everything about her, discreetly, and I need the information before sunrise." "Consider it done," Ben replied without hesitation. As the Maybach sped through the city, Liam replayed the moment in his head. The whisper, the warning, the name, Protocol 0. It sounded like a failsafe or a self-destruct command. Something hidden. Something buried. He pulled out his phone and made a call to the head of his due diligence team, a tech prodigy named Kenji Tanaka. "Kenji," Liam said, his voice sharp, "run a search through all the Viridian data, every file, every line of code, every footnote in the patent filings. I'm looking for a specific term, Protocol 0. I don't care what you have to do. I want an answer in 1 hour." Back in his penthouse overlooking Central Park, Liam shed his jacket and tie, pacing the vast minimalist space. The city lights glittered below a kingdom he had built. But for the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of vulnerability. He had built his empire on information, on knowing more than the other guy. Tonight, a complete stranger, a waitress, had slipped through his defenses and told him his entire world was a house of cards. An hour later, Kenji called back, his voice strained. "Sir, I've run the search. It's strange. The term Protocol 0 appears nowhere in the primary data, the simulations, or the official documentation. Not once." Liam's jaw tightened. "Nowhere, are you certain? Positive? It's as if the term doesn't exist in their universe," Kenji said. "But I found something. In the deep archive of the server data we mirrored, there are fragments, deleted log files, overwritten code snippets. In a few of those corrupted fragments, the string PZ appears. It's always associated with catastrophic failure simulations. Every time the Helios core model goes critical in these old buried tests, the PZ string is in the event log right before the system flatlines. But the files are heavily corrupted. It's like someone tried to digitally shred them." He buried it deep. The waitress's words, a chill ran down Liam's spine. It was real. Something was there. Just then his secure messaging app chimed. It was Ben. The message contained a single file. Liam opened it. It was a dossier. The waitress's name was Chloe Sterling. The file contained a recent photo, her address in a modest Queens neighborhood, her employment history. She was a temp working for a high-end hospitality agency. On the surface, she was nobody. Just another face in the city's anonymous workforce. But Ben had dug deeper. He had found her family history. And that's when Liam Crestwood's blood ran cold. Chloe Sterling was the only daughter of Dr. Alistair Sterling, a brilliant but obscure physicist who had died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack. The report noted that Dr. Sterling was the co-founder of a small tech startup 30 years ago, a company that specialized in theoretical energy research. The name of that company was Viridian Dynamics, and his original partner, the man who bought him out for a pittance just before the company started developing its core technology, was Silas Corbin. Liam stared at the screen, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a random act. This wasn't corporate espionage. This was personal. He looked at Chloe Sterling's photo again. The same intelligent, intense grey eyes stared back at him. They were the eyes of a woman who had lost everything. The eyes of a woman seeking not just to warn him, but to find justice. As he reached for his coat, he noticed something he'd missed. In his haste to leave the restaurant, he'd pocketed the cloth napkin from his place setting. As he pulled it out, a small folded piece of paper fell from its folds. It was a corner of an order slip torn from a notepad. On it, written in neat, precise script, was a single line of alphanumeric code and a short message. ILFH 387Z4. The original key. He won't have changed it. It's the only thing of my father's he was ever afraid of. Liam now had a name, a motive and a key. The hunt had begun. He buzzed Ben Carter on the intercom. "Ready the car," he said, his voice like ice. "We're going to Queens." The address in Queens led them to a 5-story walk-up, a pre-war brick building with tired-looking fire escapes clinging to its facade. It was a world away from Liam's polished Manhattan existence. The air here was a mix of street food and damp pavement. This was a place of survival, not victory. "You want me to go up, sir?" Ben asked, parking the inconspicuous sedan across the street. "No, I'll go myself," Liam said, stepping out of the car. "Wait here. Keep the engine running." He needed to do this alone. A man like him arriving with security would look like intimidation. He needed answers, and he sensed that Chloe Sterling would only give them if he came to her on her own terms as a man seeking truth, not as a billionaire demanding it. He found apartment 4B and knocked. The door was old, the paint chipped. For a long moment, there was no answer. He was about to knock again when he heard the sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door opened a few inches, held by a chain. In the sliver of space, he saw one of Chloe's grey eyes, wary and assessing. "Mr. Crestwood," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was as calm and steady as it had been in the restaurant. "Miss Sterling," he replied, his tone formal. "May I come in?" "I believe we have something to discuss." She studied him for another 10 seconds, her gaze sweeping over him, judging his intentions. Finally, she closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it fully. "I have about 15 minutes before my next shift," she said, stepping aside. The apartment was small, meticulously clean, and sparsely furnished. The main room served as a living room, dining room, and office. One wall was dominated not by a television, but by a massive corkboard covered in a chaotic web of notes, diagrams, photographs, and printouts, all connected by colored string. It was the kind of evidence board a detective would build for an unsolved case. At its center was a faded photograph of a kind-faced, bespectacled man standing proudly next to a much younger Silas Corbin. "That's my father, Doctor Alistair Sterling," Chloe said, following his gaze. "And that is the man who destroyed him." She gestured towards a small, worn table with 2 chairs. "Tea?" "No, thank you," Liam said, remaining standing. He held up the piece of napkin. "You gave me this. ALFH 387Z4. You called it a key." "It's a master access key," she explained, her arms crossed. "My father designed the original server architecture for Viridian. He built back doors into everything. It was his intellectual property. He felt he had a right to be able to access his own work. That key is for the legacy archive server, the one they think is decommissioned but is actually air-gapped in their sub-basement data center. It's where they dump old raw data they're legally required to keep but don't want anyone to see. It's where he would have hidden his tracks." Liam's mind raced. An air-gapped server. A physical breach would be necessary. "And Protocol 0. Chloe walked over to the corkboard. "My father was a genius, Mr. Crestwood. But he was also a cautious man. He trusted Silas Corbin, but he didn't trust the kind of people Silas was starting to bring in as investors. People who cared only about profit, not safety. The Helios core is based on a delicate quantum reaction. It's stable 99.99% of the time. But my father discovered an anomaly, a rare set of energy input conditions that could cause a cascading failure in the containment field." She tapped a complex equation scrawled on an index card. "The reaction wouldn't just stop. It would reverse. For a fraction of a second, it would draw an immense amount of energy from its immediate surroundings, causing a catastrophic implosion. Not a bomb, but a vacuum. A silent, destructive void. Anything within a 100-meter radius would be crushed instantly." Liam felt a visceral chill. The Helios core units were designed for residential and commercial districts. One failing would be a localized disaster, a citywide rollout. The consequences were unthinkable. "He called this vulnerability Protocol 0. Chloe continued, her voice tight with remembered pain. It was his term for the absolute fail state. He was developing a software patch, a governor that would prevent the core from ever reaching the required input conditions. But Silas saw it as a delay, an unnecessary expense. He argued that the conditions were so statistically improbable they'd never occur. "But they could occur," Liam stated, understanding dawning. "They could," she confirmed, "and my father refused to let the technology go to market without the patch. That was their final argument. A week later, Silas called an emergency board meeting when my father was out of town. He used my father's unwillingness to move forward and his obsessive focus on edge cases to paint him as an obstacle. He engineered a vote and pushed him out of the company he helped build." She finally looked at him, her eyes glistening. They gave him a check that was an insult and a non-disclosure agreement that was a gag order. Silas took all of my father's research, all of it. My father spent the next 25 years fighting them in court. But Silas had better lawyers and deeper pockets. The stress, the injustice of it all. It killed him. He died at his desk trying to find a way to warn the world. She took a deep breath, composing herself. "For 5 years, I've been trying to find proof. I knew he kept meticulous records. I took this job because the agency sometimes staffs events at Viridian's corporate headquarters and at restaurants like Aurelia, where their executives meet. I've been listening, watching, waiting for a chance. When I heard your deal was closing, I knew I was out of time." Liam was silent, processing the enormity of her story. This wasn't just a rigged deal. It was a conspiracy, decades in the making, built on a foundation of betrayal and a potentially catastrophic lie. "Why warn me?" Liam finally asked. "Why not go to the press? Because the press would want undeniable proof, which I don't have, without getting into that server," she said bluntly. They'd print Silas's denials and he'd bury the story with his PR machine. He'd paint me as the disgruntled daughter of a failed scientist. But you have the resources to get that proof. You were about to give him $10 billion. Right now, you are the only person on Earth with more leverage over Silas Corbin than he has over you. You're the only one who can stop him. He looked from the board, a testament to one woman's obsessive quest for justice, to her face etched with a strength that belied her simple uniform. He had come here expecting to interrogate a source. He was leaving with a mission. This was no longer just about his money or his reputation. It was about a legacy, not his, but Dr. Alistair Sterling's. "The server," Liam said, his voice low and determined. "Where is it?" "Their headquarters. Downtown," Chloe replied. "Sub-level 3. The room is shielded, no wireless access in or out. Physical access only." Liam nodded slowly. His mind was already formulating a plan, a series of moves and counter-moves. It was an impossible challenge, a fortress to be breached. But Liam Crestwood had not built his empire by backing down from the impossible. "Ms. Sterling," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "Your next shift. Cancel it. As of this moment, you work for me." The next 48 hours were a blur of controlled chaos, orchestrated from Liam's penthouse, which had been transformed into a high-tech command center. Whiteboards replaced priceless art, and encrypted laptops covered the polished surfaces. The air crackled with the energy of a brewing storm. Liam knew he couldn't use his own people for this. Crestwood Capital's employees were analysts and lawyers, not covert operatives. A breach of Viridian dynamics had to be untraceable, executed by professionals who existed in the shadows. He needed ghosts. His first call was to a man known only as Spectre. Liam had used him once before, years ago, to handle a delicate case of industrial espionage. Spectre was a digital phantom, one of the world's most formidable ethical hackers. He specialized in penetrating secure networks, not for destruction, but for information. They met not in person, but in a heavily encrypted virtual conference room that Spectre had built himself. His avatar was a simple grey silhouette. "It's been a while, Crestwood," Spectre's synthesized voice crackled. "I assume you're not calling to discuss the weather." "I need you to map a network," Liam said, getting straight to the point. "Viridian Dynamics headquarters. I need to know every camera, every motion sensor, every keypad, every digital heartbeat inside that building. I need to know their security patrol schedules and the vulnerabilities in their system. And I need it yesterday." "Viridian," Spectre mused. "That's a top-tier system. Pricey. You're not asking me to knock on the door. You're asking me to dismantle a fortress." "I'm aware," Liam said. "The compensation will reflect the difficulty." There was a pause. "Send me the preliminary data you have. I'll take a look. If it's doable, my price is non-negotiable." The second piece of the puzzle was physical. For that, Liam relied on Ben Carter. "Ben," he said, pointing to a blueprint of the Viridian Tower laid out on his table. "I need someone who can walk through walls. Someone who knows alarm systems, pressure plates, and magnetic locks like they're a second language." Ben nodded, his expression unchanging. "I know a guy. Name's Julian Pines. Used to do acquisitions for a different kind of company. Specialized in item retrieval from uncooperative collections. He's retired, but he listens when I call." "Get him," Liam ordered. While Ben made the call, Liam turned his attention to Chloe. She was no longer a waitress. She was the mission's chief intelligence officer. Seated at a terminal, she navigated through a digital archive of her father's old research notes, which she had painstakingly scanned and preserved over the years. "Silas is arrogant, but he's also lazy," she explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "He wouldn't have reinvented the wheel. The foundation of the current network security will still be based on my father's original architecture. He'll have added layers, of course, but the bones will be the same." She brought up a diagram, a complex flowchart of protocols and firewalls. "My father had a philosophical belief in redundancies. He always built in 3 layers of everything. Silas will have fortified the outer 2, but he may have neglected the 3rd innermost layer, assuming no one could ever get that far." Over the next day, the team took shape. Julian Pines, a wiry, restless man in his late 50s, with nimble fingers and the perpetually alert eyes of a cat, arrived and immediately began studying the building's schematics. Spectre sent back his initial probe results, a comprehensive map of Viridian's digital defenses, highlighting a potential blind spot in the camera coverage of a maintenance corridor on sub-level 2, lasting for exactly 93 seconds, every 3 hours, during a system diagnostic cycle. The plan coalesced around that 93-second window. It was audacious and timed to the millisecond. Phase 1 belonged to Spectre. He would launch a sophisticated phishing attack aimed at a single mid-level IT employee at Viridian, creating a temporary security credential. This credential wouldn't grant access to anything important, but it would allow them to enter the building after hours under the guise of a routine systems check. Phase 2 was Julian. Using the stolen credential, he and Ben would gain access to the building. They would navigate to the sub-level 2 maintenance corridor. During Spectre's 93-second camera blind spot, Julian would have to bypass a laser grid and a pressure-sensitive floor to access a hard-wired terminal that controlled the environmental systems for the server rooms below. Phase 3 was Chloe's contribution. From that terminal, they would upload a code she had written based on her father's notes. The code wouldn't shut down security. Instead, it would trigger a false overheating alert in a non-critical server rack in a different section of the sublevel. This would automatically redirect the on-site security patrol to the false alarm, giving them a clear 10-minute window. Phase 4 was the final breach. During those 10 minutes, Julian would have to crack the physical lock on the legacy archive room. It was an old-school tumbler lock, a relic of her father's time, but one Julian assured them was a nostalgic work of art he could handle. Once inside, Ben would use the key Chloe had provided, ALFH 387Z4, to access the air-gapped server directly with Spectre, guiding him via a secure audio link on how to mirror the drive's contents onto a shielded external device. "It's insane," Julian muttered, tracing a route on the blueprints with his finger. "Too many variables. If any one of us is off by a second, the whole thing comes down." "It's the only way," Liam said, his voice a steely anchor in the room's tense energy. "Silas closes the secondary funding round in 72 hours. Once that money is in, he'll have enough capital to weather any scandal. We have to get that proof before then." Chloe looked up from her screen. "There's one more thing. The server is protected by a final fail-safe my father called the Sterling Cipher. If you enter the wrong master password more than twice, it initiates a data wipe protocol. The drive will be magnetically scoured clean in less than 10 seconds. "And the password is?" Liam asked. Chloe shook her head. "I don't know. He never wrote it down. He said it was something that only he would know. Something personal. A new formidable obstacle." They could get all the way to the goal line, only to be stopped by an unsolvable riddle. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Liam said, though a knot of unease tightened in his gut. "Spectre, are you ready?" "Ready to knock?" the synthesized voice replied. "Julian, Ben." Both men gave a curt nod. "Chloe," Liam said, turning to her, "you will be here with me, guiding them. You know the system better than anyone." She nodded, her face pale but determined. Her entire life, her entire quest for justice for her father, had led to this single night. As the team prepared to deploy, Liam stood by the window looking out at the city. He was risking everything, his money, his freedom, his reputation, on the word of a waitress and a team of ghosts, all to expose a flaw in a deal he had once considered his masterpiece. It was a gamble that defied all logic. But as he thought of Chloe's story, of Alistair Sterling's stolen legacy, he knew it was the only move he could make. The night of the operation descended upon the city with a cold, unforgiving rain that slicked the streets and blurred the neon lights into a watercolor haze. Inside Liam's penthouse, the silence was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of electronics and the rhythmic drumming of rain against the panoramic windows. It was 2:00 a.m. Showtime. "Spectre status," Liam said into his headset, his eyes fixed on a multi-panel display showing security camera feeds Spectre had discreetly looped. "The lure is in the water," Spectre's voice replied, cool and detached. "Target acquired. A junior sysadmin named Philip, likes online poker and has a weakness for emails promising free tech gadgets. He's about to become our new best friend." On one screen, a mock email appeared, impeccably designed to look like an internal IT bulletin announcing a mandatory security update. A few tense seconds passed. Then a small icon on Spectre's display flashed green. He clicked. "We're in," Spectre announced. "I'm cloning his low-level access card now. The credentials are being transmitted to Ben's device." Miles away in a nondescript van, parked a block from the Viridian Tower, Ben Carter watched a progress bar on a small, sophisticated card writer fill up. A blank white card was fed into the machine, and moments later it emerged as a perfect replica of the sysadmin's ID. "Credentials received," Ben confirmed. "We're moving." He and Julian Pines exited the van clad in dark work uniforms with a generic Network Solutions logo stitched on the chest. They looked like any other after-hours contractors, blending seamlessly into the city's nocturnal rhythm. "You look nervous for a guy who used to do this for a living," Ben rumbled as they approached the building's side entrance. "Nervous is what keeps you from getting sloppy," Julian retorted, his fingers flexing. "Cocky is what gets you a 10-year stay in a concrete box." They swiped the card. The light on the reader turned green. A quiet click and the door opened. They were inside the belly of the beast. Back in the command center, Chloe's voice was a steady presence in their ears. "Lobby cameras are on a 30-second loop for the next 5 minutes, courtesy of Spectre. Head left past the reception desk. The stairwell door is your third on the right." Guided by her intimate knowledge of her father's designs and Spectre's real-time digital surveillance, the two men moved like specters through the deserted, echoing halls of the corporate giant. They descended 3 flights of stairs, the air growing cooler and smelling of conditioned air and ozone. They reached the maintenance corridor on sublevel 2. "Okay, this is the tricky part," Julian whispered into his mic, peering around the corner. A web of red laser beams crisscrossed the hallway, impossibly dense. "Standard Class 3 grid. You sneeze too hard, and the whole building goes into lockdown. The diagnostic cycle begins in 2 minutes," Spectre's voice cut in. "The grid will go down, but the pressure plates under the floor will remain active. Julian, it's your stage." "Just give me my cue," Julian said, pulling a small, thin metal probe from his kit. Liam watched on a monitor, displaying a schematic of the corridor. 2 dots representing Ben and Julian were poised at the edge of a red-hatched danger zone. His hands were clenched into fists. He was a man accustomed to controlling outcomes from a boardroom, moving assets like chess pieces. Now he was a helpless observer, his fate in the hands of others. "Diagnostic cycle initiating in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Spectre counted down. "The grid is down. You have 93 seconds. Go!" As the red lasers vanished, Julian sprang into action. He didn't step onto the floor. Instead, he lay on his stomach, using the probe to feel for the edges of the pressure plates under the industrial tile. He moved with a strange, spider-like grace, his body distributing its weight with preternatural skill. It was a painstaking, agonizingly slow process. 30 seconds remaining, Chloe said, her voice strained. "Almost there." Julian grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. He was halfway across. Ben stood guard, a silent, imposing statue. 15 seconds. Julian reached the other side, his hand slapping the wall inches from the hard-wired terminal. He pulled himself up his feet, carefully, finding the safe zones he had identified. 10 seconds, Julian. You have to get clear. He jacked a cable from his wrist-mounted device into the terminal. Uploading Chloe's code now. 5, 4. The upload bar hit 100%. Julian ripped the cable out. 3, 2. He scrambled back across the floor, foregoing finesse for speed, knowing the lasers were about to reappear. He hurled himself the last few feet, rolling into the safe corridor beside Ben, just as Spectre said, 1. The laser grid snapped back into existence with a faint electronic hum. They had made it, with less than a second to spare. A moment later, a new alert flashed on Spectre's screen. "It worked," he announced, a hint of admiration in his voice. "False alarm triggered. Overheating sensor in server room 7B. 2 guards are on the move." He brought up the camera feed, showing 2 security guards jogging down a distant hallway away from their target. "You have your 10-minute window," Spectre said. "The clock is ticking." Ben and Julian moved swiftly down another flight of stairs to the Legacy Archive room. The door was heavy steel with no electronic keypad, only a formidable-looking high-security mechanical lock. "My turn," Julian said, a grin finally touching his lips. He produced a set of tension wrenches and picks from his kit. They don't make them like this anymore. A Medeco biaxial. Beautiful. He inserted the tools, his head pressed against the cold steel of the door, listening to the faint clicks of the tumblers. The seconds ticked by. 1 minute, 2, 3. "How are we doing, Julian?" Liam asked, his voice tight. "Patience," Julian murmured. "This is a conversation, not an argument. She's telling me her secrets." Click, click, clack, click. Suddenly he went still. He turned the tension wrench. A loud, satisfying thunk echoed in the quiet corridor. Julian stepped back from the door and gave it a slight push. It swung inward, revealing a dark, cavernous room, filled with towering racks of old magnetic tape reels and dormant server towers. "We are in," Ben reported, his voice flat, but carrying the weight of their victory. He stepped into the room, a powerful flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Chloe, where do we find it?" "Back left corner," she directed. It should be an isolated rack labeled SAR, Sterling Archive Repository, My father had a flair for the dramatic. Ben located the rack. A single black server sat there humming faintly. It was ancient by modern standards, but it was the heart of their entire operation. He connected the shielded drive. "Okay, I'm at the terminal," Ben said. "It's asking for the password, the Sterling cipher." A hush fell over the command center. They had reached the final bridge. "Chloe?" Liam asked softly. She was staring at the screen, her face a mask of concentration. "Something personal. Something only he would know," she whispered to herself, her mind racing through years of memories. His favorite book. His pet's name. My mother's birthday. "We only have 2 shots at this," Ben reminded them. 5 minutes left in our window." Chloe closed her eyes, trying to think like her father. He wasn't a sentimental man in that way. His passwords were always based on logic, on science. A tribute to his heroes. Einstein, Feynman, Hawley. No too simple. Then an image flashed in her mind. Her father, years ago, sitting at their kitchen table, sketching on a napkin. She, a young girl, had asked him what he was doing. "I'm trying to solve the universe, sweetie," he had said with a sad smile. "But I think I'm missing the most important variable." Her eyes snapped open. "Ben?" she said, her voice trembling with a sudden certain insight. "Try this. It's case sensitive. Capital E equals lowercase m c squared. But don't use the number 2. Use the word squared. EM is squared." There was a moment of silence on the other end. Liam held his breath. "Access denied." Ben's voice came back, a hammer blow in the quiet room. "1 attempt remaining." Chloe's heart sank. She was wrong. All this for nothing. The memory was so clear, but maybe she had misunderstood. Despair began to creep in. "The most important variable," she whispered the words catching in her throat. Liam watched her, seeing her hope begin to crumble. He thought back to the corkboard in her apartment, a shrine to her father's memory. He thought about the man she described, brilliant, betrayed, but above all, a father who loved his daughter. "Chloe," Liam said, suddenly, his voice sharp and clear. "You said he was missing a variable. What if it wasn't a scientific one? What if you were the variable?" Chloe looked at him confused. "Think about the equation," Liam pressed. "He was talking to you. What's your name?" "Chloe, what does it stand for?" Her full name. "Chloe Marie Sterling." "CMS." She breathed, her eyes widening in realization. "ESMC. Squared," Liam finished. "Try that. E-Sacker CMS squared." It was a wild guess, a leap of faith based on nothing more than a father's love. "Ben, do it," Chloe said, her voice filled with renewed hope. "Capital E equals capital C, capital M, capital S, and the number 2 for squared." Again the agonizing silence. The progress bar for the 10-minute window was almost full. Then Ben's voice came through, filled with a rare note of triumph. "Access granted. I'm in. Mirroring the drive now." With the adrenaline of the heist fading with the morning light, the true work began. The specialists, Julian and Spectre, had vanished back into the shadows from which they came, leaving Liam, Chloe, and Ben in the silent penthouse. The shielded drive, the prize from their impossible raid, was connected to a secure offline laptop. It was a digital tomb, and they were about to unearth its secrets. Chloe took the lead, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The file structure was a maze of encrypted folders, but a single unlocked text file sat in the root directory. It was named README and contained a simple cryptic phrase. "The key is the question I could never answer." A sad smile touched Chloe's lips. "I know this," she whispered. It was a question her father had often muttered in despair during his long, futile legal battles. She typed the decryption key. "What is the half-life of a lie?" Instantly, the drive's contents unlocked. For hours, they delved into the digital ghost of Dr. Alistair Sterling. They found his original time-stamped designs for the Helios core, proving his ownership of the intellectual property. They watched video logs of a brilliant man, his face slowly etched with worry as he spoke of his partner's recklessness. Then they found the folder that would change everything PZ. Inside was the truth, raw and terrifying. It contained a complete simulation model of the Helios core, far more advanced than anything Viridian had disclosed. Following her father's notes, Chloe input a specific sequence of energy fluctuations. He called it a harmonic resonance cascade. She explained, her voice tense. A 1 in a billion chance, according to Solas. On screen, the core's model turned a deep, warning red. A black sphere of influence erupted from its center, and the simulation showed a city block being crushed into nothingness by a silent, catastrophic implosion. The log file was explicit: containment field failure. Protocol 0 engaged. He knew. Liam breathed, staring at the screen. Silas knew this could happen. The proof was in the next file, an audio recording. They listened to the chillingly casual conversation between the two partners from decades ago. Alistair's voice was firm, pleading for caution and for the flaw to be fixed. Silas Corbin's reply was cold and dismissive. "The risk is acceptable, Alistair," he'd said. "You're an obstacle to progress." It was the smoking gun, irrefutable proof of a willful criminal deception. But the final file was the most devastating. It was a video log of Alistair, recorded just after he was ousted from his own company. He looked broken, but his eyes burned with a cold fire. "If you are seeing this," he began, "it means Silas has pushed ahead, knowing the danger. He has built his empire on a time bomb. I have failed to stop him through conventional means, so I was forced to create my own." He explained that Protocol 0 was no longer just a flaw. He had turned it into a weapon. "I designed a remote activation key." Alistair confessed, his voice heavy with the weight of his creation. "It can send a signal to the entire Helios core network, forcing the harmonic cascade. It will trigger Protocol 0 everywhere, all at once. It is a weapon of mutually assured destruction to be used only as a last resort to prove the danger is real." He looked directly into the camera, a ghost speaking across time. "May God forgive me, but the activation key is embedded within the source code of this very video file." The video ended, plunging the room into a stunned silence. They had not just found proof to expose a fraud. Alistair Sterling, in his desperation, had given them a doomsday trigger. The leverage they now possessed was absolute, but it was terrifyingly dangerous. They held the power not only to ruin Silas Corbin, but to hold his entire legacy hostage with the threat of unimaginable catastrophe. The air in the Crestwood Capital boardroom was glacial. It was 24 hours after the heist, and Liam had summoned Silas Corbin for a final private meeting. No lawyers, no executives, just the two of them. Silas entered with a confident stride, his smile firmly back in place. He clearly believed Liam's minor detail had been resolved and that he was here to receive an apology and a signature. "Liam," he began, extending a hand, "I hope your team's late-night paranoia has been satisfied. Shall we get this deal back on track? Liam didn't take his hand. He gestured to the chair opposite him at the long obsidian table. Sit down, Silas. The command was quiet, but it carried a weight that made Silas's smile falter. He sat, his posture stiffening. There will be no deal, Liam said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Not now, not ever. Silas laughed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. What is this? Some kind of last-minute power play to renegotiate the price. It's a bit transparent even for you. This isn't about the price, Liam replied. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a single image, a faded photograph of a young Alistair Sterling and an even younger Silas Corbin standing proudly in front of a whiteboard covered in equations. Silas stared at the photo, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in his eyes. He looked up at Liam, his face pale. I don't know what you think, I've been to the Sterling Archive repository. Silas, Liam cut him off, his voice like chipping ice. I've seen Alistair's logs. I've seen his original designs. And I've seen the full unredacted simulation for Protocol 0. The name hit Silas like a physical blow. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy grey pallor. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked for the first time in his life, utterly and completely defeated. He told you. Silas whispered, his voice hoarse. That crazy old man. He warned you. He didn't have to, Liam said, leaning forward. His data speaks for itself. The flaw is real. You knew about it. You buried it and built an empire on a lie that could kill thousands of people. Silas slumped back in his chair. The fight gone from him. It was a 1 in a billion chance, he muttered, repeating the same tired excuse from the audio log. The risk was acceptable. Acceptable to you, perhaps, Liam shot back, but not to me, and not to the people whose lives you were willing to gamble with. He let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting Silas drown in it. Then he delivered the final devastating blow. Alistair didn't just leave behind his research, Silas. He left a fail-safe, a remote activation key, a way to trigger Protocol 0 across every Helios core unit simultaneously, his last resort. And I have it. If Silas had been pale before he was now ashen, the implication was clear. Liam didn't just have the power to expose him. He held a kill switch that could turn his entire life's work into a global catastrophe. It was the ultimate checkmate. What do you want? Silas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Money. You already have all the money in the world. This isn't about money anymore, Liam said, standing up and walking to the window, his back to Silas. This is about justice and legacy. He turned back to face him. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to walk away from Viridian Dynamics. You will issue a public statement citing personal health reasons for your immediate retirement. You will transfer your entire share portfolio, every single stock, into a trust that I will control. Silas stared at him aghast. You're going to take my company? No, Liam corrected him. I'm going to save it. The trust's first act will be to fund a new R&D division. Its sole purpose will be to fix the Protocol 0 flaw, to implement the governor that Alistair Sterling designed 30 years ago. We will make the Helios core safe. We will make it what it was always supposed to be. He paused, letting the terms sink in. The head of that new division and the primary beneficiary of the trust, Liam continued, will be its rightful heir, Chloe Sterling. Silas looked as though he might be physically sick. The idea of Alistair's daughter inheriting the empire he had stolen was an irony so bitter it was poison. "You can't," Silas stammered. "The board, the shareholders will be thrilled to learn that Crestwood Capital is stepping in to oversee a massive technological refit that will make their investment infinitely more secure," Liam said coldly. "As for the board, they will fall in line when I present them with a redacted version of my findings. They can either accept these terms or I can release the full data package to every major news outlet and regulatory agency on the planet. Your call." It wasn't a choice. It was an execution. Silas Corbin, the titan of industry, was broken. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and stripped of everything he had built. "And you?" Silas asked, a flicker of defiance in his voice. "What do you get out of this? You're sinking billions into fixing a company you're not even acquiring." Liam walked back to the table and looked down at the defeated man. "What do I get? I get to sleep at night," he said simply. "Now get out of my building. My lawyers will be in touch." Silas Corbin didn't say another word. He stood on shaky legs and walked out of the boardroom, a ghost leaving his own life behind. Later that day, Liam met Chloe in a small, quiet park downtown. The rain had stopped, and the city was washed clean. He handed her a portfolio containing the charter for the new trust and the R&D division. "It's all there," he said. "The Alistair Sterling Foundation. You're in control. You have the funding, the resources, everything you need to finish your father's work." Chloe took the portfolio, her hands trembling slightly. She looked at him, her grey eyes clear and filled with a profound gratitude that was more powerful than any words. "Why?" she asked the same question Silas had posed. "You didn't have to do any of this. You could have just walked away from the deal." Liam thought for a moment, looking at the city skyline. "My whole life has been about acquisition," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Buying things. Companies, technologies, influence. I was about to pay $10 billion for a legacy. But you showed me that a true legacy isn't something you buy. It's something you build. Or in this case, something you help rebuild." He turned to her. "Your father was a great man, Chloe. It's time the world knew it." A single tear traced a path down Chloe's cheek, but she was smiling. It was a smile of relief, of justice, of a future her father had only dreamed of. The deal may have been rigged, but in the end, justice had found a way to balance the books. Liam Crestwood hadn't closed the biggest deal of his career. He had just made the best investment of his life. In the end, it wasn't about the $10 billion. It wasn't about the power or the prestige. It was about a quiet whisper in a loud room, a warning that forced a billionaire to look past the balance sheets and see the truth. Liam Crestwood thought he was buying the future, but Chloe Sterling taught him that he had a responsibility to fix the past. Together, they turned a story of betrayal into a legacy of innovation and justice, proving that sometimes the most powerful person in the room isn't the one signing the check, but the one brave enough to speak the truth. What did you think of Liam's final move? Was it justice or was it the ultimate corporate takeover? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of intrigue and redemption, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who loves a good twist, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove real life is more dramatic than fiction. In the hushed, rarefied air of Manhattan's most exclusive private dining room, a single stroke of a pen was about to change the world for 50,000 people. Billionaire industrialist Arthur Sterling, a legend of American business, was about to sign away his entire life's work. The deal worth $11 billion was done. His lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell had approved it. His bankers from Goldman Sachs had celebrated it. But as his Mont Blanc pen hovered over the signature line, a voice soft as a sigh cut through the silence. A young waitress, risking everything, leaned in and whispered a warning that would ignite a firestorm. "Don't sign this." What could she possibly know that his army of experts had missed? The answer would not only save his company, it would expose a conspiracy of breathtaking greed. The Pinnacle Room was less a room and more a declaration of power. Perched 62 floors above Columbus Circle, its floor-to-ceiling windows presented a god's-eye view of Central Park. A sprawling green carpet laid out for the titans of industry who dined within its soundproofed walls. The air itself seemed expensive, a carefully curated blend of aged leather freesia and the faint metallic scent of ambition. At the head of the massive obsidian table sat Arthur Sterling. At 72, he looked every bit the patriarch of a bygone era. His silver hair was impeccably parted, his suit a bespoke creation from Savile Row that cost more than the car most people drove. But his eyes, a pale-and-weary blue, told a different story. They held the weight of a 50-year career, spent forging an empire, Sterling Industries, from a single machine shop in Ohio into a global manufacturing powerhouse. And they held the deeper, more personal weight of loss. It had been 2 years since his wife, Martha, had passed, and the silence in his life had been deafening ever since. Selling the company had felt less like a choice and more like a surrender. His children had their own lives, their own passions, far from the grit of foundries and factories. He was tired. The endless quarterly reports, the relentless pressure to innovate, the constant battles with regulators and rivals, it was a young man's game. Across the table, Damien Stryker smiled, a flash of perfectly white teeth in a tanned, handsome face. Stryker was the CEO of Vanguard Equity Partners, the private equity firm acquiring Sterling Industries. He was everything Arthur was not: young, slick, and utterly unsentimental. He spoke in a language of synergies, leveraging, and shareholder value that felt alien to Arthur, who still knew the names of the men who had worked on his factory floor for over 40 years. A historic day, Arthur Stryker said, his voice smooth as aged whiskey. He gestured to the 2-inch-thick document in the center of the table. "A testament to your life's work. We are honored to be its custodians." Arthur gave a non-committal grunt. He didn't like Stryker. The man's charisma felt manufactured, his compliments hollow. He was surrounded by a phalanx of equally sleek young men in sharp suits, lawyers from the prestigious firm Skadden, Arps, Slate, Mager and Flom. Arthur's own team, led by his longtime general counsel Robert Henshaw, looked tired and outmatched, like old lions facing a pack of hungry wolves. Robert slid the final signature page in front of him, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the line marked with a small yellow flag. "Everything's in order, Arthur. We've been through it 100 times. It's a clean deal. A clean deal. $11 billion. It was a staggering sum, enough to fund his charitable foundation for a century. It was the logical conclusion. The smart move. He uncapped his custom Mont Blanc pen, the one Martha had given him for their 40th anniversary. Its nib was solid gold, its weight familiar and comforting in his hand. This was it. The end of an era. He took a deep breath, the filtered air of the Pinnacle Room feeling suddenly thin and suffocating. He thought of his first employee, a man named Frank Miller, who had lost 2 fingers on a stamping press in 1975. Arthur had personally driven him to the hospital and paid for his children's college education. He thought of the thousands of families in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania who depended on the pensions and healthcare plans he had fought to protect for decades. Stryker had assured him of Vanguard's commitment to the employees. "The Sterling family is our family now," he'd said with that predatory smile. Arthur had wanted to believe him. He had to believe him. His hand was steady as he lowered the pen. The gold nib was a millimeter from the crisp, heavy paper. The silence in the room was absolute, a held breath of anticipation. It was a moment pregnant with the weight of history finance and the future of 50,000 lives. And then a ghost of a sound, a whisper. Chloe Jensen's hands were trembling, but not from the weight of the silver tray holding a bottle of sparkling water. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. From her peripheral vision, she watched the scene at the head table with an intensity that bordered on painful. She was just a waitress, a nobody, a law student at NYU, paying off a mountain of debt by serving overpriced food to men who wouldn't even register her existence. But she knew. God help her, she knew. Her life was a grueling marathon of lectures, study groups, and 8-hour shifts at the Grand Regent Hotel's fine dining restaurant. To make extra money, she had taken on a side gig that utilized her legal training, late-night document review for a temp agency. It was mind-numbing work, sifting through thousands of pages of discovery documents and contracts for large law firms preparing for litigation or major transactions. 3 weeks ago, she had been assigned a rush job. The client was Skadden Arps. The project code was Project Legacy. For 2 straight nights, fueled by coffee and sheer desperation, she had read through draft after draft of a massive acquisition agreement. She'd cross-referenced appendices, checked definitions, and flagged inconsistencies. She didn't know the names of the companies then, only that it was a huge deal involving an old industrial giant and a private equity firm. One section had caught her eye. It was titled The Sterling Legacy Provision. It was an unusually robust and employee-centric part of the contract, explicitly guaranteeing the full funding and protection of the company's pension plan for no less than 25 years. It locked in healthcare benefits for retirees and mandated that any workforce reductions in the first 5 years could only be done through voluntary buyouts and attrition, not layoffs. It was a beautifully crafted piece of legal protection, a fortress built to protect the little guy. She had been impressed, even moved. Then last night, she had seen the final version, a clean-up review, they called it. The section was still there, but the title had been subtly changed. It was now called the Asset Realignment Protocol. The language was dense, almost impenetrable. But Chloe, her eyes trained by thousands of hours of reading legal text, saw the truth. The fortress had been hollowed out from the inside. The 25-year guarantee was replaced with an 18-month review period. The ban on layoffs was replaced with a clause allowing for synergistic workforce restructuring. And buried deep in a subappendix was a provision that allowed the new owner to terminate the existing pension plan and transfer the assets into a new, far less secure 401k program, a move that would save the buyers hundreds of millions of dollars at the expense of lifelong employees. It was a betrayal codified in legalese, a dagger hidden in a bouquet of corporate jargon. She had reported the discrepancy to her temp agency supervisor, who had told her to stick to the brief and that final changes were above her pay grade. She had been a cog in a machine, and the machine was designed to crush people like Frank Miller. Now, standing here, watching the legendary Arthur Sterling, the man whose name was on that beautiful protective clause, about to sign its corrupted version. She felt a wave of nausea. She could walk away, say nothing, keep her job graduate, and become one of them. Or she could risk it all. Her job, her tuition, her future career. She could be fired, blacklisted. She saw Arthur Sterling's shoulders slump slightly, a flicker of profound weariness in his eyes. She didn't see a billionaire. She saw her own grandfather, who had worked for Bethlehem Steel for 40 years, only to see his pension gutted in a corporate buyout. The memory, sharp and bitter, was the only push she needed. Her training dictated she remain invisible, but her conscience screamed at her to act. Moving with a grace she didn't feel, she approached the table to refill Arthur's water glass. Her movements were fluid, practiced. No one paid her any mind. She was part of the furniture. As she leaned over his right shoulder, her mouth was inches from his ear. Damien Stryker was smiling, his eyes fixed on the pen. Robert Henshaw was already looking relieved. Chloe's world narrowed to that single, terrifying moment. The risk was immense, the reward non-existent. It was simply the right thing to do. Her voice was barely a breath, a secret past in the cathedral of power. Mr. Sterling, she whispered, her words urgent and low, meant for him alone. Don't sign this, please. Check Appendix D, subsection 11B. The legacy provision. It's been changed. She pulled back instantly, placing the water bottle on the tray, and turning to leave as if nothing had happened. Her heart was a runaway train. She didn't dare look back. She just walked each step in eternity, expecting a hand to grab her shoulder, to hear an angry voice demanding to know what she had done. But all she heard was a sudden, deafening silence, and then the sound of a heavy gold pen being placed very deliberately back on the table. The click of the Mont Blanc pen against the polished obsidian was a small sound, but in the taut silence of the pinnacle room, it echoed like a gunshot. Every head at the table snapped towards Arthur Sterling. Damien Stryker's perfect smile faltered, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. Arthur, is something wrong? Arthur didn't answer immediately. His mind was racing. The whisper had been so clear, so specific. Appendix D, subsection 11B. The legacy provision. It's been changed. It wasn't a vague warning. It was a precise, actionable piece of intelligence. Who was she? How could a waitress possibly know the internal structure of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition agreement? His first instinct was corporate espionage. A plant from a rival firm. A disgruntled employee. But her face, when he caught a glimpse of it as she turned away, held no malice, only a profound, desperate sincerity. And fear. He was a man who had built his empire on judging character, on reading the subtle cues people gave off in high-stakes negotiations. Her fear felt genuine. He looked at his own lawyer, Robert Henshaw. Robert had been with him for 30 years. He was a good lawyer, but he was also 70, comfortable, and perhaps too trusting. He had accepted the assurances from Skadden Arps that the final draft only contained minor housekeeping changes from the version they had approved weeks ago. It was standard practice in deals of this size not to relitigate every single line item at the 11th hour. Trust was the lubricant of commerce. But what if that trust had been betrayed? Arthur Stryker pressed his voice, losing a fraction of its smoothness. The champagne is getting warm. Arthur Sterling raised a hand, a placating gesture that held an unmistakable command. He gave a small, self-deprecating chuckle, a performance honed over decades in boardrooms. Forgive me, Damien, a senior moment. 72 years have a way of catching up to you. There was just one small detail Martha always harped on about. A legacy, she called it. He turned his tired blue eyes on Robert Henshaw. Robert, humor an old man. Let's have another look at the employee pension provisions, the legacy clauses we worked so hard on. Just to be certain. Robert Henshaw blinked, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before being replaced by professional deference. Arthur, we've been over this. It's ironclad. Scadden confirmed the language mirrors our last red line. I'm sure it does. Arthur said, his voice gentle but firm. But my late wife's ghost is nagging me. Let's just call it a final tribute to her memory. Where are those provisions located again? One of the junior lawyers from Stryker's team. A nervous young man with slicked-back hair spoke up. That would be in Appendix D, sir. The Asset Realignment Protocol. The name hit Arthur like a cold slap. Asset Realignment Protocol. That wasn't what he and Robert had called it. They had called it the Sterling Legacy Provision. It was a small change, but in the world of law, the name of a thing was often the key to its true purpose. The waitress had used the old name. Stryker shot the young lawyer a venomous glare that made the man physically recoil. He then turned back to Arthur, his smile back in place, but it didn't reach his eyes. A new name for a new era, Arthur. A more dynamic, forward-facing term. The spirit of the provision is entirely unchanged, I assure you. I'm sure it is. Arthur repeated the words, now laced with ice. But I find myself in a pedantic mood. Please, Robert, read it for us. Appendix D, subsection 11B. Wasn't it? He looked pointedly at the nervous junior lawyer, who nodded mutely. The request hung in the air, a flagrant breach of deal-closing etiquette. To scrutinize a minor subsection at the signing table was an insult. It implied a lack of trust so profound it could derail the entire process. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The lawyers from Scadden Arps exchanged uneasy glances. Damien Stryker's jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle pulsed in his cheek. Robert Henshaw, flustered, began shuffling through the massive document. It will take a moment to find Arthur. It's a dense document. We have time, Arthur said calmly, leaning back in his chair. He folded his hands over his stomach and fixed his gaze on Damien Stryker. It was a look he had used to break union bosses and bring arrogant suppliers to heel. A look of infinite, patient power. While the lawyer's scrambled Arthur's mind was on the waitress, he needed to speak with her. He needed to know how she knew. He caught the eye of the maitre d', who had been hovering nervously near the door, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod towards the direction the waitress had gone. It was a gesture that said, "Find her. Keep her here." "Do it quietly," the maitre d', a professional accustomed to the silent commands of the powerful, simply bowed his head and vanished. The game had changed. The signing was no longer a formality. It was now a hunt, and Arthur Sterling, the old lion, who everyone thought was ready to retire to the savannah, had just caught the scent of blood. While Robert Henshaw and his team frantically leafed through the contract, creating a rustle of paper that sounded like dry leaves in the tense silence, Arthur excused himself. "A glass of water for an old man's throat," he announced, pushing his chair back. "Don't start the party without me." Stryker watched him go, his expression a mask of controlled fury. The moment Arthur was out of the room, he turned to his lead counsel. "What the hell is in 11B?" He hissed his voice, a venomous whisper. Arthur ignored the frantic energy behind him. Guided by the discreet maitre d', he was led not doucement to the men's room, but down a service corridor, a stark, sterile world away from the luxury of the pinnacle room. The air here smelled of bleach and cooking grease. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Leaning against a stainless steel food warmer, looking pale and terrified, was the waitress, Chloe Jensen. The maitre d' gave a nod. She was on her way to the locker room, Mr. Sterling. I told her you wished to compliment her on the service. He then melted back into the shadows, leaving them alone. Chloe stood straighter, her hands clenched at her sides. She was preparing to be fired, or worse. Arthur stopped a few feet from her. He looked at her closely for the first time. She was young, maybe 25, with intelligent eyes that held a mixture of fear and defiance. Her uniform was cheap polyester, but she wore it with a kind of dignity. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice quiet, without a trace of anger. "Chloe. Chloe Jensen, sir." "Chloe," he repeated softly. "You took a very big risk in there." She swallowed hard. "I know, sir." "Why?" It was a simple question, but the answer was everything. Chloe took a breath, deciding to tell the unvarnished truth. There was no point in lying to a man like Arthur Sterling. "I'm a law student, sir, at NYU. Second year," she began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I work here to pay tuition. I also do freelance document review for a temp agency that services big law firms. It's mostly grunt work, but it pays well." Arthur's eyes sharpened with interest. This was no random act of sabotage. This was a professional opinion. "A few weeks ago, Chloe continued, my agency had me on a project for Skaden Arps, codename Project Legacy. I spent 2 nights reviewing the acquisition agreement. Your agreement. I read the original Sterling Legacy provision. It was a good clause, sir. It protected everyone. It was clear you cared about your people." A flicker of emotion crossed Arthur's face. Martha had helped him draft the spirit of that clause. Then last night I was assigned to a final review. Small changes, they said. But the name had been changed to the Asset Realignment Protocol. I knew that was a red flag. I read it again. The language was deceptive. They twisted it. They added loopholes you could drive a truck through. The 25-year pension guarantee became an 18-month review period. The layoff protections were gone, replaced by a restructuring clause. They added a new subsection 11B that gave the new owners the right to terminate the defined benefits pension plan entirely and seize the surplus assets after converting it to a basic 401k. She looked him straight in the eye, the fear in her own being eclipsed by the force of her conviction. They didn't just change it, Mr. Sterling. They gutted it. They turned a shield into a sword, and they hid it behind 100 pages of boilerplate. They were counting on no one rereading the whole thing at the last minute. They were counting on you, trusting them. The corridor was silent, save for the hum of the lights. Arthur Sterling stood motionless, processing her words. She had not only identified the change, but had articulated the malicious intent behind it with the clarity of a seasoned lawyer. Seizing the surplus assets of a pension fund, it was a classic predatory private equity move. It could net Vanguard an extra $500 million money stolen from the retirement funds of his employees. He felt a cold, creeping rage, followed by a profound sense of shame. He had almost let this happen. He had been so focused on the finish line, so tired of the fight, that he had nearly betrayed the very people who had built his company alongside him. This young woman, a stranger, had shown more loyalty to the spirit of Sterling Industries in one whispered sentence than his own legal team had in months of negotiation. He looked at Chloe, and for the first time in 2 years, he felt the fog of his grief and weariness begin to lift, replaced by the old familiar fire of purpose. "You said you are a student at NYU. Law?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "What do you intend to do after you graduate?" Chloe blinked, thrown by the question. I hope to work in corporate law, sir. Maybe in-house counsel somewhere. If I haven't just completely torpedoed my career." Arthur Sterling allowed himself a small, grim smile. "On the contrary, Miss Jensen," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound authority. "I think your career has just begun." He turned to head back to the dining room. "Wait here for me. Don't go anywhere. The performance is about to begin, and I want you to have a front row seat." When Arthur Sterling re-entered the Pinnacle Room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Robert Henshaw was sweating, dabbing his forehead with a silk pocket square as he stood over a page in the document, his face pale. Damien Stryker and his team of lawyers stood in a tight, whispering knot, their predatory confidence replaced by a frantic, cornered energy. They all stopped and looked up as Arthur closed the door behind him. Arthur walked calmly back to his seat, the picture of a man unburdened by any care in the world. He sat down and looked expectantly at his lawyer. "Well, Robert?" he asked, his voice deceptively mild. "Did you find the section? Was my old memory playing tricks on me?" Robert Henshaw cleared his throat, unable to meet his client's gaze. He looked down at the paper as if it were a venomous snake. Yes, Arthur. I've found it. Appendix D subsection 11B. Excellent. Arthur beamed, though his eyes were chips of ice. Read it aloud for all of us. I'm sure it's just the same noble language we drafted, perhaps phrased a little differently. For the sake of synergy, he shot the last word at Stryker like a poisoned dart. Stryker took a step forward. Arthur, this is highly irregular. It's an insult to the integrity of my legal team and your own. This is a standard clause designed to provide operational flexibility in a modern business environment. Is it? Arthur replied, his voice dropping to a low growl. Then you should have no objection to hearing it read aloud. Unless, of course, the operational flexibility you're referring to is the flexibility to plunder the pensions of men and women who have given their entire lives to this company. The accusation, raw and direct, struck the room dumb. The pretense of civility was shattered. Now Robert Arthur commanded his voice like steel. Read. With trembling hands, Robert Henshaw began to read. The language was convoluted, a thicket of legal jargon, but its meaning became chillingly clear as he spoke. The acquiring party reserves the right following: an 18-month transitional period to initiate a comprehensive review of all defined benefit obligations. In the event of a planned termination, all surplus assets exceeding the minimum statutory funding requirements shall revert to the parent company for the purposes of capital reallocation and debt servicing. He trailed off, his voice hoarse. He didn't need to read any more. Everyone in the room understood. It was a license to steal written on company letterhead. Robert looked up at Arthur, his face a mask of horror and professional shame. Arthur, I never saw this. It wasn't in the draft we approved. They must have slipped it into the final executable copy. They assured us the changes were cosmetic. Arthur ignored him, his gaze locked on Damien Stryker. The younger man's handsome face was now a tight, bloodless mask of fury. The charm had evaporated, revealing the cold predator beneath. "A clever piece of writing," Arthur said softly, the words dripping with contempt. "My compliments to your lawyers at Skadden Arps. They certainly earned their exorbitant fees." "Tell me, Damien, was this your plan all along? Buy my company with my own employees' pension money. How very efficient." Stryker finally broke. "This is business, Arthur. Not a charity. That fund is overfunded by nearly $1 billion. It's a wasted asset on the balance sheet. Your sentimentality is why this company, for all its history, is undervalued. We are here to unlock that value." "Unlock value!" Arthur roared, slamming his hand on the table. The crystal glasses jumped and rang. For the first time, the old lion let out his full voice, a sound of righteous fury that made everyone in the room flinch. "You call theft unlocking value. You stand in this room and talk about balance sheets, but you forget that those assets are the years of sweat and loyalty from thousands of people. They are the promise of a dignified old age for a machinist in Detroit, a line worker in Cleveland, a secretary in Pittsburgh who trusted me. They trusted the name Sterling." He stood up, his full height, seeming to diminish every other person in the room. He reached for the signature page of the contract. Stryker watched a flicker of hope in his eyes, thinking perhaps Arthur would sign it anyway, that the money would win out. Instead, Arthur Sterling took the page in his two hands. With deliberate, satisfying force, he tore it cleanly in half. Then he tore it again, and again. He let the pieces of the $11 billion deal flutter from his fingers onto the center of the obsidian table like bitter confetti. "There is no deal," he said, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Get out of my sight." For a moment, no one moved. Then Stryker, his face contorted with rage, pointed a trembling finger at Arthur. "You'll regret this, old man. I'll have my lawyers bury you. We have a signed letter of intent. You can't just walk away." Arthur smiled, a truly terrifying sight. "Your lawyers," he said. "My first call will not be to my lawyers. It will be to the Attorney General of New York and the Securities and Exchange Commission. I imagine they'll be very interested in a case of attempted fraud of this magnitude. And then I'll call the Wall Street Journal. Your firm Vanguard Equity and your partners at Skadden Arps are about to become very, very famous." The threat was devastating and absolute. Stryker's face went white. The careers and reputations of everyone on his side of the table flashed before their eyes. In a flurry of panicked whispers and slammed briefcases, they scrambled out of the room. A defeated army in full retreat. Arthur Sterling stood alone at the head of the table, the pieces of the broken deal before him. His own legal team looked at him with a mixture of awe and terror. He had just walked away from $11 billion. But Arthur Sterling didn't feel like he had lost a thing. He felt like he had just won back his soul. The silence that descended upon the Pinnacle Room after Stryker's chaotic exit was a physical entity heavier and more profound than the soundproofed walls could ever create on their own. It was a vacuum filled with the ghosts of $11 billion and the sharp metallic tang of shattered trust. Arthur Sterling's own team, his lawyers, his bankers, stood frozen, looking like shipwreck survivors on a desolate shore. The magnificent view of Central Park seemed to mock them, a serene, indifferent witness to the corporate carnage. On the obsidian table, the torn pieces of the contract lay scattered what Arthur had called bitter confetti, a testament to a future that had just been violently unwritten. Robert Henshaw, his face the color of old parchment, took a shaky step towards Arthur. The professional mask he had worn for 40 years had crumbled, revealing the terrified, deeply ashamed man beneath. This wasn't just a failed deal. It was the nadir of his entire career, a catastrophic failure of his most fundamental duty to his client, his friend. Arthur, he began, his voice cracking thick with a lifetime of unspoken loyalty. There are no words, no excuses. I failed you. I got lazy. I trusted their reputation, their assurances. Skadden Arps. You don't expect a firm like that to engage in back-alley fraud. He gestured helplessly at the torn papers. I should have read every line myself, even if it took all night. I should have. Martha would never have let me get away with such carelessness. The invocation of his late wife's name struck Arthur, but not with the sting Robert might have expected. Instead, it brought a strange clarity. He looked at his old friend, seeing not a traitor, but a reflection of his own fatigue. We both got complacent, Robert. Arthur said, his voice surprisingly gentle, devoid of the thunder he had unleashed on Stryker. The rage had burned away, leaving a core of cold, hard purpose. We both started thinking about the end of the story, instead of paying attention to the chapter we were in. We forgot that the world is full of hungry wolves, and they love nothing more than a sleeping lion. He placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, a gesture of weary forgiveness. This isn't on you alone. It's on me for wanting it to be over. But it's not over. It's just beginning. His gaze shifted to the grand door. He had a new general for this new war, and it was time for her enlistment. He caught the eye of the maitre d', who still hovered nervously in the doorway, and gave a simple, clear nod. Please send Miss Jensen in. A moment later, Chloe entered the room. If she had felt overwhelmed before, she now looked like a lone foot soldier, wandering onto the command deck of a battleship after a major battle. She took in the scene, the stunned, powerful men, the august, silent room, and the billionaire who stood at the center of the storm, looking not diminished but somehow larger, more vital than before. Her eyes fell to the destroyed contract, and she felt a fresh wave of terror mixed with a bewildering sense of vindication. Arthur gestured for her to approach the table, his demeanor calm and reassuring. He swept the torn pieces of paper into a small, neat pile, a symbolic clearing of the old, corrupt foundation. He looked at her, his tired blue eyes now holding a spark she hadn't seen before, a flicker of the brilliant, incisive mind that had built an empire. Miss Jensen. He began, his voice resonating with a quiet authority that commanded the attention of everyone in the room. In my 50 years in business, I have encountered thousands of lawyers, bankers, and consultants. I have paid them fees that could fund a small nation, all for their supposedly expert advice. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over his own shell-shocked team before returning it to her. Yet, today, the most valuable, the most crucial piece of counsel I received came not from a senior partner at Sullivan & Cromwell, but from a law student at NYU, working a double shift to pay her tuition. He continued, "Courage is a rare commodity, Ms. Jensen, but courage combined with integrity and intelligence that is nearly extinct. Most people would have stayed silent. They would have weighed the personal risk against a problem that wasn't theirs and chosen the path of least resistance. They would have protected themselves. Why didn't you?" The question was genuine, his curiosity profound. Chloe swallowed, finding her voice in the cavernous silence. My grandfather worked for Bethlehem Steel his whole life. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice steady. He was promised a pension, a secure retirement. When a private equity firm bought the company in the 90s, they used legal loopholes very similar to the ones I saw in your contract to gut that pension fund. He lost almost everything. He died thinking he had failed his family. I saw that clause and I didn't see legal language. I saw my grandfather's face. I couldn't just serve water and walk away. A deep, knowing sadness touched Arthur's eyes. He nodded slowly. So you understand. You understand that this is not about numbers on a page. It's about people. It's about promises. He straightened up, a new energy coursing through him. I find myself in a unique position. I have just summarily dismissed my M&A advisors and have lost considerable faith in my long-time legal counsel's oversight. And I still own a multi-billion-dollar company that it appears is in desperate need of a moral and ethical immune system. It needs a new generation of leadership, one whose compass is fixed on true north, not magnetic north, which wavers depending on where the money is. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. I am creating a new position. It will report directly to me, and only to me. A director of corporate integrity. This person will be my eyes and ears, an internal watchdog, with the authority to review any contract question, any initiative, and veto any proposal that violates the spirit of this company. They will be a guardian of our principles. It's a position that requires a spine of steel, a brilliant legal mind, and an incorruptible character. He held her gaze. I would like to offer that position to you. Chloe's mind went blank. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. She heard the words, but they didn't compute. Director, report to him. It was an absurd, impossible fantasy. Mr. Sterling, I'm a student, she stammered, the same protest as before, but it felt even more inadequate now. I'm flattered, but I'm not qualified. I haven't even passed the bar exam. You have passed a far more important test today, Ms. Jensen, Arthur said firmly, waving away her objection. As for the rest, it's a matter of logistics. Sterling Industries will immediately pay off your existing student debt in full. We will of course cover every cent of your remaining tuition and expenses at NYU. You will be placed on the executive payroll effective immediately at a salary that will put you in the top percentile of law school graduates. You can work part-time as your studies allow and transition to full-time the day after you pass the bar. He wasn't finished. Your first assignment, he added, a grim smile touching his lips, will be to assist me in finding a new law firm. A pack of bulldogs, not the pampered poodles we've been using. You will help me vet them, interview them, and prepare the litigation we will now be pursuing against Vanguard Equity Partners for fraudulent inducement. You will be in the room for every meeting. It was a complete, overwhelming, life-altering vision of a future she could never have conceived. The crushing weight of her loans, the constant anxiety of making rent, the fear that she would spend her life as a cog in a machine, she despised it all, evaporated in an instant. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. But this time she didn't fight them. They were tears of shock, of relief, of a profound and staggering gratitude. Say yes, Ms. Jensen, Arthur prompted gently. She took a deep, steadying breath, and for the first time she smiled a genuine, radiant smile that transformed her face. Yes, Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes. I accept. Arthur Sterling extended his hand across the obsidian table over the ruins of the broken deal. Chloe reached out and took it. Her grip was firm, her hand steady. Their handshake was not the perfunctory, bloodless ritual of the corporate world. It was the sealing of a new contract, one not written on paper, but forged in principle. It was a promise to build a better, more honorable future for Sterling Industries. A future where the legacy of a man like Chloe's grandfather would be protected, not plundered. 1 year later, Arthur Sterling stood before the same floor-to-ceiling windows in his corner office. The panoramic view of Central Park, a sea of green and gold under the autumn sun, was unchanged. But the man looking out at it was a different person entirely, forged anew in the crucible of the year that had passed. The weariness that had settled deep in his bones, the quiet grief that had clouded his judgment, was gone. In its place was a formidable clarity, a rediscovered sense of purpose that made him feel more alive at 73 than he had at 60. The year since the disastrous signing in the Pinnacle Room had not been quiet. It had been a war. Following Chloe's advice on her very first assignment, they had not retained a massive established law firm. Instead, they hired a boutique litigation firm out of Chicago, known for its scorched earth tactics and its utter fearlessness in taking on corporate giants. They were the bulldogs he had asked for, and they had been unleashed. The lawsuit filed against Vanguard Equity Partners and Skadden Arps was a masterpiece of legal aggression, accusing them not just of breach of contract, but of conspiracy to commit fraud. Chloe, while still attending her final year of law school, became an indispensable part of the legal team. Her meticulous notes from her time as a temp reviewer, once dismissed by her supervisor, became Exhibit A in the preliminary hearings. She sat beside Arthur during the brutal hours-long depositions, her sharp memory and quick mind often catching Stryker's lawyers in subtle contradictions, earning her the grudging respect of their own legal counsel. The public front of the war was just as ferocious. The Wall Street Journal story had landed like a bomb in the financial world. Titled The Billion-Dollar Betrayal, it detailed the plot to plunder the Sterling Pension Fund, casting Damien Stryker as a modern-day robber baron and Arthur Sterling as the old guard industrialist, making a final stand for his people. The narrative was powerful and clear, thanks to a series of carefully managed interviews with Arthur, who, guided by Chloe, framed the fight not as a deal gone wrong, but as a battle for the soul of American capitalism. The SEC investigation that followed was swift and damning, and within 6 months, Damien Stryker had resigned in disgrace, his golden reputation irrevocably tarnished. Vanguard Equity Partners, facing an exodus of investors and a mountain of legal fees, settled with Sterling Industries for an undisclosed but reputedly staggering sum. But the true revolution wasn't happening in the courtroom or the newspapers. It was happening inside the walls of Sterling Industries itself. Arthur, galvanized by his near-catastrophic mistake, had turned his full attention back to the company he had been so ready to abandon. With Chloe acting as his strategic advisor and moral compass, he didn't just save the company, he remade it. The $2 billion modernization plan was rolled out not as a cost-cutting measure, but as an investment in his workforce. In the Ohio plant, state-of-the-art robotic arms now worked alongside veteran machinists who had been retrained in programming and diagnostics, their decades of experience now more valuable than ever. The new profit-sharing program, initially met with deep skepticism by the union, had silenced all doubters when the first checks were distributed. For the first time, a line worker in Detroit saw a direct reward for the company's success, fostering a sense of shared ownership that no corporate memo ever could. And in honor of his late wife, Arthur had established the Martha Sterling Memorial Scholarship Fund, an endowment that would pay for the college education of employees' children for generations to come. Through it all, Chloe's transformation had been nothing short of meteoric. She had juggled the immense pressure of her new role with the final grueling months of law school. There were nights she'd leave a tense strategy session with the lawyers at 10 p.m., only to spend the next 4 hours studying for her corporate finance exam. She graduated, as predicted, at the very top of her class. The day she was sworn into the New York bar, Arthur had closed the entire executive floor and held a reception in her honor. Her office was now next to his, a spacious room with warm walnut furniture and the same breathtaking view. It was a world away from her cramped apartment, and she never forgot it. She had become Arthur's most trusted confidant. He valued her sharp, legal mind, but he treasured her perspective even more. She saw the company not as a collection of assets, but as a community of people, and her influence was felt in every major decision. She had quietly but firmly vetoed a plan to switch to a cheaper health insurance provider, and had championed a new policy for paid parental leave, arguing successfully that stable families made for a stable workforce. On this particular afternoon, she walked into Arthur's office holding a folder. She had the same quiet dignity as the day he first met her, but now it was layered with a calm, earned confidence. "Good news," she said, her smile bright. The board just gave final approval for the new childcare initiative. The plans for the on-site centers at the 3 largest plants are being drawn up now. We should be able to break ground by spring. Arthur turned from the window, a genuine smile spreading across his face. The initiative had been Chloe's passion project for the last 6 months. She had built the case for it with impeccable data, showing how it would reduce employee absenteeism and increase retention among young parents. But her winning argument had been a moral one. "We can't call ourselves a family company," she had told the board, "if we force our employees to choose between their careers and their children." He took the folder and looked at the preliminary designs. Then he looked at Chloe. "You fought for this." The CFO said it was an unnecessary expense. "You changed his mind. You changed all their minds. I had a good teacher," she replied, her gaze meeting his. "Someone who taught me that the best arguments come from the heart, but they need to be backed up by the facts. Besides, I just showed them the letters." She tapped the folder. Tucked inside were dozens of emails she had collected from employees, mothers and fathers who spoke of the daily struggle to find affordable, reliable childcare. Arthur nodded, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He had spent his life building a legacy of steel and industry, of market share and profit margins. He had been ready to sign it all away, to encase that legacy in the amber of a financial transaction. But Chloe's whisper had shattered the amber. It had forced him to see that a legacy isn't a monument you build and leave behind. It is a living thing that must be tended to, that must evolve and grow and breathe. The new sterling legacy was not just about him anymore. It was about the profit-sharing check that helped a family afford their first home. It was about the scholarship that sent a machinist's daughter to medical school. It was about the on-site daycare that would allow a young mother to advance in her career without sacrificing time with her child. He hadn't sold his company. He had given it a new soul. And in Chloe Jensen, the waitress who had risked everything for a principle, he had found the perfect guardian to ensure that soul would never again be put up for sale. And so Arthur Sterling didn't just walk away from a deal. He walked back to the principles that built his empire in the first place. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true value isn't always found in an $11 billion price tag. Sometimes it's found in the courage of one person who dares to speak truth to power, even in a whisper. Chloe Jensen didn't just save a company. She resurrected its soul, and in doing so forged her own incredible destiny. Her story shows that your current position doesn't define your potential impact. What did you think of Chloe's incredible bravery? Have you ever had a gut feeling that something was wrong and decided to speak up? Share your own experiences in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of courage, big or small. If this story of integrity, triumphing over greed, resonated with you, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that one voice can make a difference. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story that will inspire and surprise you. Thanks for listening.